15 years. That is how long I gave Kane Industries. 15 years of late nights, missed birthdays, and loyalty that never wavered. And do you know how it ended? Not with a thank you, not with a handshake. It ended with my boss, Richard Kane, standing in front of the entire office, his hands in his pockets, and a smirk on his face as he told me I was finished. The words cut sharper than any blade. Colleagues I once called friends stared down at their desks, too afraid to meet my eyes. My life, my career, everything I had built was dismissed in less than a minute, like I was nothing. But Richard Kane made one mistake that morning, a mistake he will never forget, because while he thought he was destroying me, I was already holding his fate in my hand. I slid a small USB drive into my pocket and walked out in silence. I never looked back. He thought he ended my career that day, but what he didn't know was that I was carrying the one file that could end his entire company. My name is Rachel Harris. I'm 42 years old, and for 15 years I gave everything to Kane Industries. Not some of me, not what was left over after life, all of me. Vacations? Skipped. Birthdays? Missed. Weekends? Spent inside that glass tower while my children sent me pictures of the cake I wasn't there to cut. I trained the eager new hires who later stepped over me for promotions my boss, Richard Kane, handed out like candy. And still I stayed, because I believed loyalty meant something. I believed building his empire meant he would, in time, honor my place in it. My health paid the price too. Sleepless nights, staring at spreadsheets, stress that carved lines into my face before their time. Coffee became my blood, deadlines my heartbeat. While Richard Kane smiled on magazine covers as the visionary CEO, I was the invisible engine grinding underneath, making sure his vision didn't collapse. But the sacrifices didn't just end with me. They spilled into my home. My husband carried the weight of raising our kids when I was chained to the office. My daughter once asked if I loved Mr. Kane more than her. I laughed then, but the truth stuck to me like a thorn. Because in a way, I had given more of my life to that man's company than to my own family. 15 years. That's a lifetime. And what did I have to show for it? A boss who dismissed me like yesterday's news. Colleagues who couldn't meet my eye as I was escorted out of the building. And a retirement fund I trusted to him, frozen, locked away until he decided otherwise. My reputation questioned. My dignity stripped in one public moment. But what Richard Kane never understood was that the same system he built his empire on, the one I designed from the ground up, line by line, code by code, was also the very thing that could destroy him. And while he thought my story ended the day he humiliated me in front of everyone, it was only the beginning. The cracks started small. So small, I almost convinced myself I imagined them. The first was the meetings. For years, I was the one who built the financial models, the projections, the risk reports. I was always seated at the long mahogany table beside Richard Kane, ready with the answers when investors grilled him. But then, one day, my calendar invite simply never came. I thought it was an oversight. Until it happened again. And again. Soon, I was watching younger, fresher faces walking past my office with folders I prepared, heading into rooms where I no longer belonged. I told myself, "Stay calm, Rachel. You're too valuable. He needs you." But then came the promotions. Men and women half my age, with resumes thinner than the coffee in the break room, were suddenly directors, managers, even vice presidents. And every time their announcement hit the company email, it felt like a knife sliding between my ribs. The cruelest part? I had trained most of them myself. They were climbing ladders I had built, while I remained on the ground, holding the base steady. Still, I kept working. I thought loyalty would be noticed. I thought endurance mattered. Then came the humiliation. Public, sharp, and deliberate. One morning, Richard Kane called me out in front of the entire floor. The mistake? A misplaced decimal in a secondary report I hadn't even authored. His words cut through the office. 15 years, Rachel, and you still can't keep your numbers straight? Laughter followed, muffled but present. I stood there, swallowing the burn in my throat, my hands trembling over papers I no longer trusted myself to hold. I went home that night and looked in the mirror, wondering when I had started believing I was as small as he made me feel. But Richard Kane wasn't done. He saved his final cruelty for last. On a Tuesday morning, under the sterile glow of fluorescent lights, he called me into his office. His smile was calm, almost rehearsed, as if he'd practiced in the mirror. "Rachel, this isn't personal. It's restructuring. You understand." 15 years of loyalty condensed into one word: restructuring. No handshake, no thank you, just a cardboard box for my desk and a security guard at my shoulder, as though I were a thief. Colleagues averted their eyes, suddenly busy with screens and papers as I walked past. After 15 years, I wasn't even worth a farewell. I was disposable. But what Richard Kane didn't know, what no one in that building knew, was that as I carried my box through the lobby, I also carried something else, something he had overlooked, something that was going to turn his empire to dust. That night, my apartment felt like a tomb. The box they let me carry out of Kane Industries sat in the corner, half filled with a framed photo of my daughter, a mug that said "World's Best Analyst," and a pen I had once been proud to receive as a 10-year service gift. 15 years of my life reduced to scraps that suddenly looked cheap, meaningless. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the dark, replaying it over and over, the smirk on Richard Kane's face, the way he straightened his tie as if he had done me a favor by discarding me. I felt the weight of every weekend I had missed with family, every birthday I had worked through, every ounce of loyalty I had given him. My chest tightened, and for a moment, despair threatened to crush me whole. But then, clarity. I remembered something I had almost forgotten in the fog of humiliation. For years, I had noticed the irregularities, the contracts that didn't line up, the numbers that shifted too neatly, the emails marked confidential, but copied to me by mistake. At first, I brushed them off. Then, quietly, I began to save them, not out of malice, but instinct. A whisper in my gut telling me, "You might need this one day." I opened my laptop, and there it was, tucked away in a folder no one knew about,
buried beneath innocuous names and subfolders. Line after line, contract after contract, email after email. A puzzle Richard Kane thought no one had pieced together, but I had. My hands hovered over the keyboard as I scrolled. That gnawing despair inside me hardened into something else, something sharp, something steady. He thought he erased me, but he didn't know I had the blueprint to the very empire he stole from me. That was the night the victim in me died, and something unbreakable took her place.
In the days that followed, I didn't rage, I didn't beg, and I didn't wallow. I planned. My mornings started at the dining table, not with job applications, but with files, stacks of contracts, printed emails, spreadsheets only I knew how to read. Every document went into neat, color-coded binders. I didn't rush. I was meticulous. I wasn't just gathering proof, I was building a weapon. Then I called a lawyer, not just any lawyer, a quiet, sharp man I had once helped with an internal audit years back. He owed me a favor, and more importantly, he respected the way I saw details others missed. When I slid the first binder across his desk, his eyes widened. "Rachel," he whispered, "this isn't just irregular, this is criminal." I didn't smile. Not yet. I just nodded and told him there was more, much more. Meanwhile, Richard Kane strutted through the city like a king. I heard the rumors, champagne lunches, jokes at my expense in the executive lounge, stories about how I had burned out and wasn't cut out for the big leagues. Every smile on his face only made me more patient. And late at night, when the city quieted and the bitterness tried to creep back in, I would pull open my drawer and look at it. The small black USB drive. It sat in my palm like a loaded gun, humming with quiet power. Richard had no idea what was inside it. No one did, and until the right moment came, I would keep it that way. He thought firing me was the end of my story. But really, it was the beginning of his.
3 months later, Kane Industries hosted its annual shareholder meeting. The ballroom at the Grand Regency Hotel gleamed with crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. Investors arrived in tailored suits, cameras clicked as journalists shuffled into the back rows, and at the head of the stage, Richard Kane himself. He spoke like a king addressing his loyal subjects. His voice carried pride, arrogance, and the kind of confidence only a man drunk on power could summon. "This year," he declared, "we surpassed every expectation. Growth is unstoppable, and the innovations under my leadership will carry us into the future." The audience clapped. Some even stood. He soaked it in, smiling like he had already conquered the world. I waited until the applause died down. Then, quietly, I stood. Every step down the aisle echoed in the silent hall. No one expected me there. Not after the way he discarded me, and yet there I was. Calm, deliberate, a leather folder under my arm, and a small black USB drive between my fingers. Richard's eyes locked on me. The smirk on his face faltered for the first time in years. "Rachel," he stammered, the microphone picking up the crack in his voice. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer him. Not yet. I walked straight to the front, past the cameras, past the security who hesitated because they could sense something bigger was about to unfold. I stopped at the podium. My voice was clear, steady, cutting through the heavy air. "You built your empire on lies, Richard. But what you never understood is that I was the foundation. And without me, it all collapses." I opened the folder first. Inside were the documents no one in that room had ever seen. Falsified financial reports, hidden accounts, double entries designed to trick investors. Gasps rippled across the hall as I laid them one by one on the table beside him. Then came the contracts. Patents, system designs, operational blueprints, all registered under my name, not his. The same tools he had paraded as his legacy, the very software that had carried Kane Industries forward for a decade, were legally mine. I had never signed them over, and now, in black and white, the truth stood undeniable. Finally, I slid the USB into the projector port. The screen behind us flickered to life. Rows of emails, each signed by him, each a proof of his theft. He had taken my work, my years of labor, and passed them off as his own. But the timestamp files told the real story. Rachel Harris was the architect of Kane Industries. Richard Kane was nothing more than a thief in a suit. The room erupted. Shareholders whispered, journalists raised their cameras, investors' faces drained of color. And Richard? His mask cracked in real time. His jaw clenched, sweat gathered at his temple, and his hand trembled as he reached for the folder. I snapped it shut before he could touch it. "No," I said, my voice firm, carrying to the very back of the hall. The silence that followed was deafening. He looked around for support, for allies, for anyone to save him, but all he saw were cold stares and betrayed faces. In the span of minutes, the empire he bragged about moments earlier was in ashes, and the truth was there for the world to see. He had thought firing me would end my career. Instead, it ended his.
By the next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Kane Industries rocked by scandal. CEO accused of fraud, intellectual theft. His name, once polished and untouchable, was now dripping with disgrace across every newspaper, every website, every investor call. The fallout was swift. Investors pulled out in droves. The very board members who used to nod and laugh at his every word now scrambled to distance themselves. The managers who had once parroted his cruelty, who had smirked when he humiliated me, suddenly turned silent. They abandoned him as fast as rats leaping from a sinking ship. And Richard Kane? He was left alone. Stripped of the empire he thought he owned, facing an investigation that would drag his name through courts and regulators for years. For a man who thrived on image and power, it was a punishment far worse than prison. He had lost his audience. He had lost his mask. He had lost everything. As for me, I did not need to shout. I did not need to gloat. The documents spoke for themselves, and so did the law. The lawsuit I filed moved quickly, armed with the patents, contracts, and proof I had safeguarded for years. And when the judgment was read, it was my name, Rachel Harris, recognized as the rightful owner of the systems that had built Kane Industries. The payout was more than numbers on paper. It was justice. It was acknowledgement. It was the return of 15 years that he had tried to erase. The home I nearly lost was secured. My savings, once at risk, multiplied. The future he thought he had stolen was suddenly mine again, brighter than before. I was no longer the overlooked worker, the woman forgotten in the back of boardrooms. I was no longer the silent employee carrying a company on my shoulders while someone else reaped the praise. For the first time in years, I stood in the light, respected, free, and in control of my own future. Richard Kane had fired me, thinking I'd walk away with nothing. Instead, I walked away with everything he thought was his. When I walked out of that courtroom for the last time, the air felt different, lighter. I had carried 15 years of silence,
sacrifice, and betrayal on my back, and now it was gone. He thought firing me would bury me. Instead, it freed me. But I still wonder about one thing. If you had the chance to destroy the person who betrayed you, to strip them of their power, their pride, their empire, would you take it? Or would you turn away, leaving their downfall to fate? Be honest with me. What would your revenge look like? Share your thoughts below, because every story, every perspective helps answer the question I've asked myself ever since. Was it justice? Or was it vengeance?